but we don't have the funds.
So graciously, our host, the owner of the restaurant, has taken the guy with the comb over that looked like Donald Trump and may in fact have been, took him by the scruff of the neck, called him an anti-socialist, and threw him out the door. So, don't be surprised if Trump comes back with a firebomb later on, because he's got a pretty rough temper. But what the heck, Joe? Tell me what good does the government do for us? We have a fair amount of socialism in place in our government. What the heck good does it do for us?
Well, I think everyone likes Social Security.
Yeah.
It does come in handy at a certain point in your life.
It's a safety net.
And for some people, situations being what it may, certain health issues arrive, and it's a safety net. You have Social Security, you have Medicare, you have Medicaid. All right, you have these are social programs. This is socialism. Yeah. This is the kind of socialism that's beneficial to the people. And at this time in our history, there is a need for the interest of the people to be protected from the exploitation of large money interests that exist for the purposes of accruing large masses of wealth at the expense of the people. And Bernie Sanders is willing to take on these large stifling entities that exist solely for their own growth in the interest of the American people.
So back when a fellow named Ronald Reagan, and I know the Republicans like to hold him up as Saint Ronaldus, the winged messenger of conservatism, although he's probably by modern Republican standards of the flaming liberal for the things he did. During his tenure, they did limit the amount of income that was taxable for Social Security purposes. That I think it's $105,000 it's capped at. So the wealthier are paying it up to the same level as fairly well-to-do people that earned $105 or thereabouts $1,000 a year, and it seems like that might be part of the reason why Social Security is in trouble, because folks are not paying in their fair share according to what they used to.
Well, according to Bernie, all right, he talks in terms of infrastructure. And the kind of infrastructure he's talking about is not necessarily concrete things, like roads and bridges and things like that. He's talking about education. And he has a program now for free college education, public colleges, public universities. That's what he wants. And I think that the figure that was tossed out was something like $70 billion. And the question was, well, where are we going to get the money for that? And Bernie says that these large Wall Street operators, they do some pretty interesting tradings that generate fantastic amounts of money. And Bernie says, well, we can tax their earnings.
And it was something like
very
one
small
1/100th of a percent, some very infinitesimally small
but that
level of taxation.
That infinitesimally small level of taxation will generate enough money, believe it or not, to enact this free college education.
Well, when you
don't take our word
let's
for it.
not go off on a tangent.
It's not a tangent.
Yeah, this is true. Let's not say these things aren't taxed. If you buy a stock tomorrow, and that stock goes up 10%, and you sell it a week later, and you're in a 35% tax bracket, you're going to pay 35% on that transaction.
Aren't capital gains capped at 15%?
No, that's if you hold the stock for, I think, a year or so.
Okay.
In other words, that's a different bracket, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's a capital gain. But
Right.
if you trade a stock, you said traders. If a person trades a stock and they sell it, in less than a year or so,
Right.
whatever that is, they pay the regular tax on that.
You're talking
That's
small,
income tax.
You want to know something?
It's regular
Miles,
rate.
these
Miles,
are
you're
like-
talking small potatoes.
These-
You're
yeah.
talking small potatoes.
What do you mean? This is a lot of money.
No,
for a
it's no,
person
isn't it?
who buys and sells stocks.
No, we're talking about we're talking about a small tax.
That's not a small tax.
We're talking about a
35%.
small tax on certain types of hedge fund transactions.
Anybody
okay?
who buys and sells a stock like that has to pay income tax. If that's how their money is made, they pay income tax.
They pay income tax. Well,
You bet.
the kind of the kind of income that can be generated from that tax is somewhere around $300 billion. $300 billion.
From what tax?
And that's the 1/100%
yeah.
additionally.
That's the kind of money that the 1%ers are making, keeping in mind that they control 90% of the wealth of the country.
Well, wait a minute. Let's not get carried away here. If a person in the 1% does exactly what I said, they buy and sell a stock within a week, they pay income tax on that. That's the rate at
on
which
the
they
profits.
pay.
On the profits.
On profits.
On the profits.
Yes, on the
On the
profit.
profits, and that's what he's
On the
talking about.
profit.
That's what he's
they
talking
pay.
about.
Yeah, let's have to keep.
But the profit that's being generated at that level is enormous.
Well, that brings us to something else. Now, if you want to talk about what may be fair, you may not be talking about taxing the actual gain of a transaction, but actually taxing the overall income. In other words, if a person makes a couple of $1 million a year, they shouldn't be in a 33% tax bracket. They should perhaps be in a 70 or 80% tax bracket. That's another story, and I think that's coming.
Or certainly more than what they're in, because back as recently as President Dwight Eisenhower, who was in office when I came into the world, and again one of my favorite presidents personally, the tax rate back then was as high as 90%. Of course,
right.
there were write-offs.
Yeah.
There were ways of avoiding paying
That's right.
quite that much.
Yeah.
But you certainly had people paying a lot. The wealthiest of the wealthy paying a lot more.
Yes.
In funds to the government.
Yes.
To run the country.
Yes, well,
to
that
build
was
the
done.
Eisenhower
If you
interstate
recall,
system.
that was done because money was needed for the war.
Sure. Yeah.
And it was during the Second World War that a very steep graduated income tax was instituted, and then afterwards it melted away. And people are talking, and I don't doubt that Bernie would be, in the forefront of an effort to try to make the tax code more progressive.
Right.
Yeah.
As the entities were getting wealthier and wealthier, and their ability to influence the political system, it was in their best interest to see to it that the tax structure altered in their favor. And what Bernie's looking for is he's looking for some kind of fairness. He's looking for some kind of equity. He's looking for a way, to get some of that wealth back in the hands of most of the American people. He's talking in terms of education. He's talking in terms of jobs. He's not very pleased with all the outsourcing that we've done. He's not pleased with the fact that huge corporations can operate in China, in Vietnam, in places where they can bypass taxation. They're making cheaper products. Those products are being exported. The American people are really happy to be buying these cheaper products on the one hand, and then on the other hand they're kind of complaining because, hey, There's not enough jobs here. Well,
You know what's an interesting thing about this business of jobs? When you buy a T-shirt in Kohl's or whatever, always says on it, made in China. You know where the cotton came from? Here. This is where the cotton is grown. Isn't that amazing? Cotton is grown here, harvested, baled up, put on ships, sent over to China, turned into T-shirts. The cotton comes back here as T-shirts, and we buy it.
well, you know, when the cost of fuel was going up, there was a possibility that the cotton would stay here and the T-shirts would be made here because the cost of transporting them back from China, all right, would be just too great. But all of a sudden, now that the cost of fuel has gone down, well, forget about those shirts being made here because of all the cheap labor that's being exploited in third world countries and in China. Come on. There should
That's
be
the balance. That's the balance of as you say, there are things that globally influence where things are produced, where cotton is grown, where I guess now we're going to probably be back to seeing fabric made from hemp, which apparently is far superior to cotton in terms of durability, less expensive, doesn't destroy the ecosystem in the process because you don't have to use as much insecticide, you don't have to fertilize as much. So,
but this notion that bringing jobs back home, and I think it's safe to say that if people were actually doing the work here to create the product, to sell locally, that like we talked about local banks in the first show, having everything stay more localized has a beneficial effect that maybe isn't so tangible, but if you look underneath the surface, it clearly is a huge benefit to keep the economy growing locally rather than making it a global economy.
Of course it is, but the corporations are not going to buy into that because their profits would be so much greater if it was outsourced.
and they're thinking short term rather than long term.
As far as they're concerned, sure. They always think short term. Their lifespan is what counts.
Yeah, where the world ends the day after they die, they really don't. It's not fair to say they don't care because we know that everybody cares, but it's easy to be distracted away from the greater good, which keeps us strong as a country and makes the world a better place to live in. Also,
You know, this business of tampering, for example, with tariffs,
Yeah.
which is sort of what we're talking about here. It's a problem. Obama, to his credit, actually, you may recall, looked into putting a tariff on steel, right?
Yeah.
Steel comes into the United States from China. A lot of us, we used to make a lot of steel, but no more. So he tried to do that, and then he learned, gee, if you tariff steel coming in, then American products that use steel are going to become more expensive, and we export a lot of products that have steel in them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get sort of caught up in it all, and it kind of unravels in a way. It's tough.
Yeah.
Tough problem.
Maybe what it all boils down to now with our discussion about Bernie Sanders running for president and his beliefs, maybe it comes down to it, and he spoke about this when he spoke at Liberty University, which is a very, very conservative, very right-wing Christian university. Maybe it all comes down to right and wrong. Maybe that's the angle that a lot of people have lost sight of, and maybe need to regain that focus on doing what's right and what's moral and what's just.
Yeah, there's a
That's the
certain
tov.
yeah. There's
Tov, exactly.
exactly. New word for me. I'm not Jewish, so it's a new word to me.
But it certainly makes a lot of sense. Joe, you were saying?
there's a certain moral imperative. All right, it has nothing to do with what your religious persuasion is. It's just this internal thing that tells you, hey, wait a minute, that's wrong. This amount of greed, this amount of acquisition is hurtful. It's detrimental.
Yeah.
It's not only not in my best interest in the long run, because sooner or later it's going to catch up to me, and I'm going to have to pay the price.
Yeah.
But it's detrimental to the rest of the society, and the activities that went on between Wall Street and the banks during that period around 2008, it was absolutely obscene, and no one cared. It was like a runaway train without an engineer, until it finally hit a brick wall.
But we cared, but we didn't have the power to have an effect on that. And I guess that's what we're looking for now, because we feel very confident that Bernie Sanders, with a very strong moral compass, is going to provide us that opportunity, if elected, provide us that opportunity to regain control of that notion that, as you say, we all have that. It has not a religious necessity. It doesn't necessarily have a religious component, but we all have a moral compass. We all have a pretty good idea about what's right and what's wrong, and we just have to take the initiative to act on that.
Yeah, I think we have to think in terms of maybe Bernie's socialism as not being meddling, but rather being oversight to make sure that our food and water are apropos of us ingesting them without winding up terribly ill. And our banks are trustworthy. And even our police force does not brutalize people because of the color of their skin and things of that sort. So with the sum total of this is, I think, goodness. And I think that's what Bernie's about goodness. And I think maybe the time is coming for we here in the United States and the world maybe to think more in terms of, as you pointed out, what is good? Goodness.
We all have a pretty good idea, I think, and I trust that everybody, even folks that I don't agree with, that are of a more conservative political bent, I think they understand right and wrong. And I think even the wealthiest of the wealthy people in the world have a sense of what's right and what's wrong. They just maybe need a little bit more encouragement to follow through on that understanding of what's right and what's wrong. And that comes down to leadership.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about Bernie Sanders as a leader.
Well, he brought out an issue. He was talking about a South American country. I believe it was Uruguay. Philip Morris and Uruguay involved in a free trade.
Yeah.
Okay. Uruguay determined that it wasn't in their best interest to be importing all these cigarettes, and so they wanted to put some kind of restriction. Believe it or not, they were unable to do so because it was in violation of the trade rules and regulations that were set up, and Philip Morris could compel them to import the tobacco products.
So that was NAFTA or CAFTA, one of those,
whatever that was,
early trade agreements,
yeah,
which, in fact,
okay,
give everybody the shafta, if you want to put it bluntly.
Because whatever is legal is not necessarily moral.
Right.
All right? It's just the way it is. But there are certain legal rules and regulations that are put into effect, all right, that have to be reviewed, looked over, and maybe modified.
Yeah.
Because they're not right. They may be legal, but they're not right.
And legal is not necessarily right, not only by one's own personal moral compass, as we saw with the woman in Kentucky who wants to do things according to her moral compass, but there's a greater overarching moral compass than gay marriage. There are things that are more important in the world than a person wants to spend their life with and bond with as a family. There are more important things. They're protecting everybody from being poisoned, as you so aptly pointed out, by decisions that are made for the sake of a dollar or of whatever currency you happen to live under. But go ahead. I think you really.
Well, take the issue of abortion. Okay, now there's abortion. This is right. Is it wrong? Well, the bottom line is, all right, there's something growing inside a woman's body. All right. Now, hey, that might be a human being.
Yeah.
Fine. Well, does that human being have the right to exist? Well, maybe it does. But it's inside the woman's body.
Right.
It's her body. She has control over that body. And what she does with that body, which is hers, is her own business.
Parents
right.
do have rights that minors don't have, whether you're talking about minor kids or kids that haven't come into the world yet. You're right.
But this is an issue that doesn't belong on the political agenda. It really doesn't. What it does is it distracts from issues that are far more important. Not that it isn't important whether or not this is a life growing inside this woman's body. Personally, I believe it is. Personally, I believe that maybe that child should be allowed to be born and possibly adopted, but it's her body.
Mm-hmm. And she should have that,
she
that element,
has to have the final say on whether or not she wants to go through with this or not. Now, what occurs to these fetuses after they're born, that's another subject.
Yeah. How are they taken care of? Are they going to be...
All right.
And this is what goes into a lot of decisions that women make about whether or not to continue a pregnancy.
What you have to realize is that, listen, this is a sensitive subject, okay? And therefore, this material that's the byproduct of this abortion has to be handled sensitively. And apparently, from what the right is saying, it wasn't. And now it's becoming a political issue.
Well, to you folks out there that want to limit the number of abortions, go out and adopt a kid. Because if you adopt a kid, that sends a message that a woman may, in fact, make the decision to bear a child if she knows in her heart that somebody is going to be there to take care of that child. Not necessarily the government, maybe somebody that's going to adopt it and take care of it and nurture it. And that's part of the whole overarching scheme with that, the whole overarching thinking about whether a woman is going to terminate a pregnancy or continue it. And I think you're right about that. And there are more sensitive ways of approaching the issue and more sensitive things that people can do. For instance, during the Clinton administration, abortions came down. Some people say it was because the economy was better, possibly. Under the Bush administration, where you would think exactly the opposite, the abortions would be down, they were up. You could say it was the economy, but the point being that it's a lot of things play into people's decisions, and decisions that I think the point you're making is that best be left to the family.
Speaking of family, when Bernie Sanders was at Liberty University, he did tackle that particular point, and his feeling was, listen, family is pretty big. Family is something that involves all of us, the American family. The American family that deserves to be educated.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say we all have family values, and our family values are pretty similar.
And he was talking about the degree of unemployment among whites, among Hispanics, among blacks, youths, young people. All right, what's going to happen? They're just going to be put in situations where they may perpetuate the problem of unwanted pregnancies. The thing to do is see to it that there's schooling provided for them. See to it that there are some jobs provided for them. See to it that there are means, for them to move through the society.
Going back to the issue of right to life and choice and so on and so forth, thank goodness we have a constitution in this country. And it seems that when there is great controversy among the people and among the legislators, we can go to that wonderful document. And that's just what happened with Roe v. Wade. What happened was they said, in that document, in the 9th Amendment, you were guaranteed the right to privacy. And that was the key to choice.
And that evolved out of Griswold v. Connecticut. That was the court ruling which paved the way to expanding and thinking about not just birth control, because Connecticut's a very Catholic state. And it was at that time, back up until the 60s, it was pharmacies would not sell the pill, would not sell condoms, would not sell birth control. And they had a right to do that with pressure from a segment of our society which sought to control everybody with their values.
Yeah, the point that I was making was you have this controversy, which Joe described very aptly, but in the final analysis, the roadblock was broken by the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yes.
How does the Constitution and the court deal with something like Citizens United? I mean, that's the dilemma. I mean, how does that come about? How does that put an entire obstacle in a political system that allows for people to vote and elect their leaders?
One man, one vote.
Well, one man, one vote. We don't have that anymore. We got big money, big vote.
Right. We have the means at our disposal to modify the Constitution to speak to that issue, and I think in the long term we may do that.
Bernie Sanders has that one on the agenda. He's definitely against the abuses of big money in the electoral system.
Determining who our candidates are going to be and making our candidates grovel. Spend a lot of time, rather than talking about issues, make them grovel for large amounts of money to put into the media as advertising.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. I think in England they have an approach to that. They cut the period down in which the electioneering can occur. Right?
Probably a good idea.
Yeah. In other words,
and with that, we're going to have to wrap it up. Continue your thought, and we're going to go right into the closing. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
They cut it down.